All right, let's set the stage real quick. One of my favorite parts of my job is getting to interact with passionate creators. And recently I got an opportunity to sit down with Calder Limmen, the CEO of Wooting, while we were in Taipei for Computex. We booked a podcast studio, fired up the cameras, and just full sent it. Fair warning, summer in Taipei is brutal, so you get to watch us cook in real time under the studio lights, and turns out I like to say the word right a lot.
Right.
Initially, I only committed cutting all this down to a 12 to 15 minute long video because as a decent sized creator, you have to at least be kind of aware that a CEO might try to leverage your channel to do a 2-hour long media trained commercial. But Calder surprised me. Within 20 minutes, I knew we were going to drop this thing completely uncut. So in a world of hyper produced content, settle in and get ready for something raw. This is an unfiltered 2 hours with the mind behind one of gaming's most impactful peripherals. No elk meat, no test levels, no cold plunges.
I am here today with Calder Limmen. He's the CEO of Wooting and the man behind the enormously successful 60HE. And we are here in Taipei at Computex, and I got to take some time out of his day so that we could sit and talk a little bit about how you got here, how Wooting got started, and where Wooting's going. So I guess the first question for me is, what possessed you to try to take on the behemoth keyboard industry as an independent? Because that's not, I know a little bit about the business and I've talked to a lot of people that have navigated that, and that is not traditionally something that people would advise you to do, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. It was the thought of like, oh, well, let's start this company and start competing against all these big players. And actually it was much more simple. Yeah. It was, it's a bit of a story, but I'll try to keep it brief. But so I have two other founders with me. I have two other founders, Erik and Jeroen. Mm-hmm. And we always said I'm the business guy, Erik is the design guy, Jeroen is like the engineering guy. And when we just started, I was just more focused on I want to sell mice, keyboards, curated mice and keyboards on an online store in the Netherlands.
As a retailer, not as a manufacturer.
Yeah, okay. As a retailer. That's where it really started. But then I was like, okay, which products am I going to sell? And yeah, this brand,
sure,
I wouldn't recommend.
You don't need to name names. Yeah, I understand.
And so I got really picky. But I thought, okay, there's a couple of brands we can just focus on and then find that target group. So then I go to distributors and I'm like, okay, I want to buy this and this brand. And I was looking at the pricing they were giving me, and it was like, well, online I can buy this product for, let's say, $80, and the price I got from them, $80. And then another one, maybe $75.
So little to no margins at all
That's right.
As a retailer. Okay.
Yeah, and that kind of pissed me off.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and I'm the kind of guy where if something really doesn't like make sense, or it really feels weird to me, like it has to make sense in a way, it really grinds my gears and I can't stop, thinking about it. And that was the point where I was like, okay, well, I wasn't planning to do this, but just let's go to the next level and let's just import it from outside in. So there was a moment that I went to Computex and I was like looking around, and then you had a lot more Asian-based brands.
Sure.
They were showing their products, and I was like, okay, so do I want to sell this on my store? I'm like, nah. Too gamer, so stereotype.
The aesthetic, right?
Yeah, the old aesthetics. Yeah. And like, what is it that you're bringing to the table? And I already felt like I'm going to bring your brand on, and I need to feel convinced myself that I'm going to sell your brand. And it was really high up in my head that I needed to do that. But then along the way, I encountered this manufacturer, and they were making optical switches. And the optical switch, I was looking at how it worked. I was like, hey, hold on. You can do an analog signal with this. I don't know why that captured me immediately. I had a few mechanical keyboards already. I was into mechanical keyboards already due to StarCraft 2.
Okay.
And then when I just saw the switch mechanism, like, okay, well, this can do analog input. And that kind of opened the door to me thinking like, hey, hold on. If you can do that, then you can do this, then you can do that. And then my first question to them was like, okay, which brand is going to bring out a keyboard that has these features?
Right.
And they're like, what?
So it was a use case they hadn't thought of with the technology that they had in place?
That's right. Yeah.
Wow, okay.
And the only thing they were thinking about is, well, because of this, it makes RMA a lot easier because you could also swap the switch out because it was optical.
Sure.
And they were thinking all in digital terms. And well, that moment I just felt, maybe I'm looking at this all wrong. I should just, if nobody's trying to do this, I should just do it myself, And that was kind of the starting point. But at that point was also, well, okay, I have a very clear goal in mind. I just want to make an analog keyboard. That was the only thought. But I have no finance, I had no background experience, or like I hadn't worked in the industry itself. So it was kind of like, okay, how do I even do this?
Right.
So first of all was convincing the manufacturer. They were not convinced. But I got frustrated about this. So I did the next best thing. I went to one of their customers that I thought was one of their customers. And I sold their customer on my idea, which I didn't completely tell them what that idea was.
Yeah.
And the customer proceeded to call the manufacturer and said like, hey, what is the idea?
Try to backdoor you on that.
Yeah. And they really wanted to know. And then the manufacturer said, oh, okay, so this guy does have something.
Yeah.
So they called me back in and they said, let's have a meeting. And then basically came with the proposal. This is the idea. And I think I can do this. And they were like, okay, you know what? We're not going to talk with anybody about this. You're going to make a prototype, and then, if it works, right, we're going to make it with you, right? If it doesn't work, it's done. Yeah. So then I came to the point where it's like, okay, so how do I make it then?
Wow.
And that's kind of where I was initially with Eric working on this because we had the idea for the reselling. And when it came to the point of like how to make this, believe it or not, I was thinking about Jeroen because I saw a random video about he was doing something for his study and that involved a device, programming a device and then using it in a game.
Yeah.
And I was like, it must be related. And the only reason why I know Jeroen is because we played games together in the past. So I gave him a call. I proposed to him, look, I'm doing this thing. I have no idea what I'm doing. But I think you can, help out and figure this out.
So was the original goal, because we're going back to like the Wooting 1 and the Flare Tech switch at this point, right? So was the original goal always to have like an analog controller emulation?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's right. So when I just started with the analog input stuff, my first thought was, okay, we can get joystick-like movement, granular movement in these different games. Could be a racing game, could be any game. How can we get it into the PC with the keyboard? And it's one thing to get like the analog input on the keyboard, but it's a whole nother thing to actually make it work in the game. So I had actually another guy another friend of mine, software developer, and I was like asking him questions like, how would you approach this? And he was also saying, well, maybe you can do like Xbox emulation, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And that kind of kicked off the idea of like, okay, we have a general idea what we can do, but then how do we put it together electronically speaking and on the firmware on the keyboard? That's where Jeroen kicked in. He happened to be doing like his study was exactly this piece of like.
And so it all just overlapped with the idea that you had in place.
Yeah, it
like
did.
We would call that kismet. That's pretty. That's
really?
Yeah, that all that aligns like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was great, and thankfully Jeroen is also very entrepreneurial. So he was like, okay, let's give it a shot. Why not, right? So then we started working on the prototype, and the next challenge was okay. While we're working on the prototype, we've seen like, hey, it can actually work. We made something workable. And that was also a whole road of getting there, but it worked. But it was like, I don't know, 0.8 millimeter analog input or something.
Right.
But it was good enough to show like we have the capability of doing this. And it was like finance was the next thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll touch on the finance piece in just a second. I really want to know, you mentioned StarCraft, but was there a game or a title that any of you played that you had a longing to be able to have analog controller emulation on a keyboard like that? Was there any specific title that really moved that along, or it was just the general idea of being able to execute that?
This was really about the general idea. Yeah. So my background, Eric's background, Jeroen's background, it's all in gaming. Like our whole youth has been all about gaming. There's been one game in particular we played with the three of us also a lot. So that we're already all in the gaming scene, and there's a lot of synergy between the idea of analog input and in gaming.
Right.
But then, it was not like we had this one particular game where it's like, oh, you have this, you know, you have this huge benefit or something. It was more like, okay, well, there's this application that's not being used here. We think it can be very useful, but at the time we're also not sure what kind of, you know, issues or blockades or barriers there would be if we tried to develop this. So
Well, yeah, because a lot of software titles aren't designed to simultaneously take advantage of mouse and keyboard input and controller input. So that had to be a huge challenge because I would imagine every game engine is set up a little different, right?
that's right. Yeah. And that was the biggest struggle, finding the right game titles that would both support the keyboard mouse and the controller all at the same time. And you saw different implementations from game developers. One would say, well, when I detect a mouse or a keyboard, I'm going to block out
Completely
the controller.
ignore the alternate. Yeah.
Completely, yeah. Other one would take it all simultaneous, but then they had like this UI thing where it's like, okay, well, you have these tooltips in the game, and in the UI, you'll see which button you need to press.
Right.
Yeah, is that going to be that keyboard button or that controller button?
What will it default to for the graphic?
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
like switching the whole time.
Oh, wow.
And depending on the game, it could have a frame rate hit also.
Far Cry. I guess the best example I can
Is
think
that
of.
Far Cry? Yeah.
It was something that early on, it was like, I think the impression was like, wow, they definitely accomplished this. They said that they would be able to accomplish this analog emulation, and they have effectively accomplished this. And so I think for me, it was, okay, where is this applicable? There were certain games, probably the best example I can think of is like a Grand Theft Auto, where when I moved, I was on keyboard and mouse for a long time and then moved to controller for 10 years and then back to keyboard and mouse. And I really appreciated the aiming accuracy of the mouse. And so like in Grand Theft, if you're on foot or, you know, in a gunfight, then you really want that instant accuracy.
Yeah.
But the moment you hop in a vehicle, it's a terrible feeling, you know, being on a mechanical keyboard versus being on an analog controller. So
Yeah.
up until the point that your product launched, I would play the on-foot portions on mouse and keyboard. And then as soon as I hop into a car, I would literally pick up the controller that was sitting in front of the keyboard and play that portion on the controller.
I'll tell you the better one. We had, over time of the development, we had people that would play with one hand the controller and the other hand the mouse.
No.
And they'll be using joystick on one hand and then the mouse on the other one. Yeah.
That hurts my brain. I don't think I could do that.
Yeah, we literally had people telling their stories about this.
So let's go back to I want to know, because there's always this thing in any industry, but particularly in the tech industry and in content creation, where people feel like someone's an overnight success. And I think that there's a lot of people out there that think that Wooting really came about when the 60HE launched, and that they're unaware of kind of the path to get there. Take me back to what did the company, what did the scale, what did the resources look like in the early days of trying to get the Wooting 1 off the ground and in customers' hands?
Yeah, so that gets into the finance part, especially. First of all, before the 60HE, we're already around for 7 years, which is quite a long time.
Right.
Yeah, and it was, I have to say, also very frustrating sometimes to see like new brands come up and you're looking at them, you see them like growing a lot. You're like, oh my God, what are we doing wrong? You're always comparing it a bit and finding, because you have to imagine in our position with absolutely no background experience with any of this, it's always kind of the question, are we doing things right or not right? And I think everybody has this to a degree where you feel you need to compare yourself with like the standard model.
Sure.
And tune and find out, are you following the standard model or not? Is this good or bad?
As a content creator, it's very relatable. Yeah, it's very similar. Yeah.
Well, you have other channels then, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then it's like, what are they doing right?
Why are they growing so fast? What's wrong with my content? Yeah, you're always questioning the model. Yeah.
Business, exactly the same. Yeah. And well, that was very frustrating. But at the same time, over time, I've learned to cope with this. Maybe we'll get back into that. But in the very beginning, it was with the Wooting 1, like, okay, we have no finance also to invest into any of this.
Right.
So we did a Kickstarter for the Wooting 1. And I had tried like a little Kickstarter before to kind of test the grounds and understand how does a platform work, what to expect from it, studied up on it a lot. And before we launched that Kickstarter, we also already published a bunch of stuff and tried to collect email. And then we launched it. And, you know, if that was for the Wooting 1, and that raised about $150,000, like roughly.
Did that meet or exceed the goal? What was the target when you were going in?
Well, so the other piece of finance was just getting a loan from family, basically. I think we had like 40, which approximately like at that time was like in dollars, maybe $48,000 maybe that we were able to put together.
Does not seem like a lot to launch a product and go into the manufacturing process.
Usually that's already gone on like molds and stuff.
So, yeah, exactly.
But our thinking was like, if we can at least get our like break even on with the molds and stuff. That's what we can put the campaign goal on,
Sure.
because we will always need to invest a bit and like get things running. So we're willing to take that risk. So the Wooting one Kickstarter, I think we only put in like 30,000, and we had to do it in euros. So it was like 30 or 40,000 euros. And to get to the 150,000, we had about 800 people that backed that product. And that was I mean, if that wouldn't have happened, we would have not been able to do any of it. So
yeah, because I don't think the end consumer really has an understanding of just how expensive the prototyping process can be.
Oh yeah. I have to say though, one benefit we had there is that we had a manufacturer that was we were able to convince them and to be as curious as we were if it could work or not.
Right.
And for them, there was a huge gain, because if we'd opened up like a new market for them, they could sell something maybe proprietary to these like new other brands, customers and everything.
So you had a relationship where they had a vested interest in making sure that your idea was successful.
That's right.
That seems rare. That doesn't seem like something you get a lot in the business world.
No, yeah. And so that's why, there's some credit due also with the manufacturer we worked with at the time, because it's also for them that if they would have not believed in what the idea was and taken that risk also, then this would have also not worked out. So they helped a lot with the prototyping phases and making sure that, our end of the deal is like, we're going to figure out how this works. Their end of the deal is like, we're going to provide you the materials you need to figure it out. Yeah. And they have the switch, of course, the optical switch. Yeah.
And so you get to the point where, let's kind of skip forward to where you've gone through the prototyping phase, you have everything ready to go, retail packaging, you have units in hand. What does the launch look like when you start to fulfill? What does that look like from the inside? What does it feel like when you're getting ready to get these in the hands of everybody who's backed you? Because help me understand the timeline from the time that somebody invested in the Kickstarter. How long was that timeline before units actually shipped into the hands of people that backed?
So mid 2015, we started on building prototypes. April 2016, I think we launched Kickstarter. And then 2017, and I can't recall the month, but let's say mid somewhere in the year is when we did the first deliveries. And there were a lot of struggles on the manufacturing side.
Yeah.
And I'm still looking back that we were able to deliver in 2017 is quite remarkable from my understanding now. But then when we did the deliveries, let's say that it was a huge relief, first of all, that, we do feel like, okay, people invested in this. And regardless of the amount of people, there's like a huge responsibility. You feel like I need to deliver on what I promised. And if I can't deliver on what I promise, I need to be at least as real as possible about what you're exactly going to get, Yeah,
very transparent.
Very, very transparent, yeah, because it's for both sides, It's like, I don't want to build up some kind of expectation that we can't live up to. And I just want to be, but I do want to show you that, we're doing the best we can do to, deliver what we promised.
Sure.
So there was a lot of that going through before doing the Wooting one. But once we delivered, there was this whole new challenge, which is, okay, we've proven that we have a product concept. We've proven that there's at least somewhat of a market. It's a very niche market that is interested in this, but how to do that continuously. Kickstarter is like this one big blast.
Right.
You have people locked in, and then you're like working towards the final piece. Of course, you have pre-orders running in the meantime, but those sales are relatively small. So it already felt like, okay, we have this one budget basically, and we have to do it with this budget and go all the way to delivery. But
No, please continue.
Yeah, but then the day-to-day business, like you still like, how do you sell a product to the general consumer? Like, how do you get your brand out there? How do you, build up your customer base? And that was like a whole new thing.
Yeah, and it seems like it would be more challenging because it's not simply a keyboard or it's not simply a mouse. It falls into that product category, but it's definitely more of it's a niche, and it's something that I think a customer would regularly, they take it for granted as it's a gaming keyboard. Okay, yeah, it is, but, and so it's, at that point in time, not only are you marketing this thing that should have wide appeal, but you're also trying to figure out how to market this on a wide scale. But and the reality is that it's a very niche product as well. That has to come with some really unique challenges too.
Yeah, it was really, I think in the beginning, we're really trying to figure out how I put this. If it was a school case, right? At school, you learn all these different things about how to do marketing, how to do business in general. And so he's like, okay, you need to figure out your target group and tailor towards it, etc.
Right.
I have a background in international business for my study. I know these concepts, but putting that into practice is like a completely different story.
Sure.
Like when you're doing this, you're going 100% willpower, motivation, and belief. And you're not taking it as a case study of let me figure this all out. So that was what was driving it forward. But in the meanwhile, we're kind of like learning about our target group because we launched this thing with an idea. We don't know if there's an actual target group for this or not. And then you have these people getting it. And then it's like, okay, so what is it that you like? What is it what you don't like? What is it you're using it for? And that's a piece of like, okay, by getting this information, we can better figure out what we should be focusing on. In the beginning, it was still very, very much about this analog movement stuff because it was very easy to explain. It was a very clear difference between the other keyboards. And then we'd say, but over time, we would say, in addition, it's like, well, there's no drawback as a gaming keyboard, but in addition, you have the analog movement, right?
Sure.
So why would you go for something else? But still, people would just regard it now as this like, oh, it's an analog movement type of keyboard and has this like, it's like very niche and blah, blah. They were not respected as a gaming keyboard.
Right.
And because of that process of every year, like I think in 2018, we launched the Wooting 2 HE because the day-to-day business was very difficult, but we knew how to do now a campaign, right? Like a crowdfunding campaign. So that's why we decided.
How large was the company at this time?
Oh, we're just still 3 people.
3 people still at this time.
Yeah.
And so if we're talking about delivery in 2017, I'm thinking back, I think I did my first YouTube video in the summer of 2015. And at that time, the tech review scene on YouTube, it wasn't that populous. There weren't a lot of, so the idea of influencer marketing, I think was also kind of coming into its own around that same time. So when you're talking about trying to market this product to the general public, how much that early on, how much was influencer marketing part of that conversation?
That's interesting because at that time, actually, press played a much bigger role. Yeah, than YouTube influencers or anything like that.
So we'd be talking about traditional websites, the big names that have been around for a long time.
Yeah. So if I think about before launching the Wooting 1, what made a big difference, we had like a landing page, we could collect emails, and then we created a video, and then we tried to get it out to different people from press. And it was Slash Gear that picked up on us at that time and then wrote an article about this concept, right? And that really brought in a lot of viewers, like a lot of people into the video and signing up for the email. And that built a good basis for us to do the launch. We could have never done the launch without this because then we'd had to still figure out how to get traffic in. But in that process, also with the Wooting 2 launching, we also figured out, hey, wait a moment. 60-70% of this traffic is all coming from our source, not from Kickstarter. And that was also the time we figured out, look, hey, we understand how to do these launches. This is actually our main way of getting cash flow investment in, because we didn't get more loans. We didn't get like external investors. It wasn't like, oh, we've proven the concept now, let's get some external investors.
Yeah, you weren't flush with money after the successful launch of the Wooting 1.
We're not. Because
we're not, right?
No.
Okay. So it wasn't like this big windfall moment where now we have the ability to do whatever we want. It was okay. We made good on this.
Yes.
Still kind of at that same level. And like, how do we do it again on a larger scale, I guess?
It's just like every year it's like, how can we do this better?
Yeah.
And then when it came to the finances, we were very, very dependent on launching something on Kickstarter in this case to get the big piece of cash. And that would be the main project we'd be working on. And we'd be working with a budget. And we'd just work within the budget, and make things work with the budget we have. Even if we'd have delays, right? We'd take that into account. And then in the meanwhile, we're trying to kind of figure out, okay, how to do this day-to-day business piece. How can we make sure the brand gets some kind of like significance and sell keyboards day-to-day? So, you have the distributor routes, you have like heavier on the paid marketing routes. Right? We like tested all kinds of different things.
Sure.
But over time, we kind of learned one very, very, very important thing is that while we're doing this like campaign launches, while we're trying to figure out how to make a better product, we learned that no matter what we do, end of the day, it's the end user. Like even with the resellers, like we had in the very early phase, we had a distributor we'd sell to, and it would be selling in like the Nordic area at that time. And we're like, okay, we're explaining to them, this is the keyboard, these are the features. It really, it's really good, and they're gonna like it if you just emphasize this piece. But the sales were just not like it couldn't like our own store sales were better than any of the like all the resellers together. Our own store sales were better.
That's impressive. I mean, that you had such a robust DTC, and it also had to be challenging if it's still just the three of you.
Oh yeah, because you have to wear a lot of hats.
A lot, yeah.
And switch around.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we didn't have a whole lot of products, so you can keep your focus.
Yeah, you weren't juggling 10 SKUs. It was, pretty much one or two primary products at that
That's
point.
right. Yeah. And thankfully, the target group we were attracting naturally, where it was a target group that was very forgiving also on like, oh, this is an early phase. Nothing else exists to compare.
That doesn't seem commonplace in the tech industry either, that you were blessed with a very forgiving fan base early on.
Yeah, yeah, it's true though. Yeah.
Yeah.
But now I have to say though, now over the years, right, the expectations keep rising.
Right.
Yeah, because we have to be more and more professional. So, not now it would be different. But at that time, but I guess there's another piece also is like we're approaching this. We have these ideas like we think this really sucks in the gaming industry. Yeah. We think this can be done better. And we're taking this different route. So there was not like a really, really good one-on-one comparison with anything else out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that gave us an opportunity. And I think when you got the Wooting 1 at the time, we had the first utility version also. Yeah, and that was already on its own a different experience from what any other manufacturer did. Albeit it didn't have all the same feature sets. The interaction with that utility was just different.
Yeah.
And that's also, that's the recurring thing. It's like we felt like, and even with the resellers, it was like, why are they even selling our stuff? Is because we have this target group that got to know us, and only by getting to know us are they going to want to buy it. It's not like a listing on the store and they like happen to see that product and then buy it or something.
They have to know a little bit about the company and the people behind it. The about tab on the website before they're comfortable just seeing an ad and pulling the trigger on the product.
Yep.
So how many people, like when you rolled out Wooting 2, how much of that was return business versus new customers that you were able to reach?
That's a good question because we got a lot of return customers on the Wooting 2. Yeah. That's also why the campaigns worked really well because we had a lot of the same customers. I think from what I remember, it was about 40%, 40%.
Wow.
Yeah. They would buy our next model. And that would already give a good fundamental piece in the whole campaign. And they would also spread it out to, their network of people that they'd say, hey, you should just do this. And that's also, if you look at how we've grown Wooting in general, at some point we just understand more and more, okay, we are just a direct consumer brand. This is what we enjoy doing. We just focus on what the end user wants. And all the marketing that we have, it's purely like product, basically. Yeah. We don't do any huge paid marketing campaigns or have like these paid advertisements running. We tried a bunch of it, like small time figuring it out, but
yeah, but I've always liked that about Wooting is that when you watch the promo videos, like it's you or it's somebody on the team. It's not a person selling me on it's not that the generic B-roll of the guy focused in gaming, it's just you guys talking about the product that you make. And I think there's a level of authenticity there that really connects with people when the entire industry is that pre-canned high-tech 3D animation B-roll of a generic guy playing games versus what you guys put in market.
This was also like the exactly the thing that I felt so disconnected with. And I think at the time, I don't know if we still say it, but like we just really don't like the gaming stereotype.
Sure.
And it makes me think about the time when I was playing a lot of games, you'd buy like a PC case and it would like write a bunch of times like owning noobs in the blah, blah, blah. And I was like, dude, come on. Like, don't put that stuff. Don't try it. It's kind of like a boomer trying to connect with Gen Z.
That's exactly, that's exactly what it feels like. Yeah. And I don't know a single soul out there. I mean, gaming is kind of, by nature, it's kind of a nerdy hobby. You don't want something that makes it feel nerdier. Like you want to feel a little better about this thing that you do. Yeah. That's really interesting. So, okay, let's fast forward a little bit. And because at this point, my view on Wooting was like, wow, they accomplished this thing. They said they did it and they did it, And it's, I struggle for a different word to use because this word sounds insulting, and I don't mean it that way at all, but it was, gimmick was something that came up a lot.
Yeah.
Not that it didn't deliver, it did. But I think that the basic consumer had they were like, yeah, cool, it does that. I wouldn't personally use it.
Yeah.
Well,
that was actually the big learning point for us. There was a moment where, we felt like this is our identity. The analog movement stuff is our identity. That's why people are buying our product, and we need to continue this path and make this as good as we can. Because otherwise, we're not going to be who we are.
Right.
Because that makes our keyboards unique. That's how we can separate ourselves from the rest, right?
And so you embraced that versus feeling like that limited you at that point, right?
Yeah, because even though we also felt like, okay, there's a high gimmick element here, and in certain games it works and it's a nice addition, but it didn't feel like, okay, this is game breaking, or this is like
a must have.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why we also started to pivot towards this idea of like, okay, it's your gaming keyboard, as you know, with everything that you'd expect from it, but it now also has this piece. But I would say that it wasn't until like the OS community, the rhythm game OS, they were talking about our keyboards because they were optical keyboards, and optical keyboards were seen as lower latency.
Right.
And we're picking up on this. We're like, okay, well, that's interesting. They're buying our keyboard because it's optical and they want the lower latency piece. And it's like, okay, well, you know what? We make all the firmware ourselves. We do all the PCB designs ourselves, right? How about we just try to focus more on this element instead of the analog movement element? I think that was like the big pivot point.
It was a big turning point because for me, the 60HE kind of came out of nowhere. And I think that's when the light bulb went off for me. It felt like a situation where in the process of trying to create this analog movement, you had somehow, and I'm sure this wasn't the case, but the outside perspective was like, they've just accidentally created the lowest latency, the fastest keyboard. You could legitimately say, this is the fastest input gaming keyboard on the market.
Yeah.
And so was that the intentional marketing behind the 60HE, or was that something that you just kind of fell into?
No, 60HE was definitely the build up towards it. So it started with this idea like, okay, low latency is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of rebranded the Wooting one a bit more towards low latency. And we started to do more firmware development towards low latency.
Interesting.
But our initial perspective of latency is that it's just all marketing bullshit.
Sure. Yeah. Because at that point we didn't really, we'll talk more about this, but you, as a reviewer, we just had to take the manufacturer's word for it.
Exactly.
They said it does this. We don't have any way to test that or validate those results at home, but sure.
And the big problem with it is it a placebo effect or not?
Right.
Because even now we see it a lot. Like people get some kind of placebo effect on if something is good or bad, like faster or not faster. And at that time, we also felt that about low latency or latency claims, right? And it's like, okay, you claim this, but how,
Right.
And because the way we approach things, like we wanted to do it. If we say it does something, we actually wanted to do that.
Yeah. And hopefully demonstrate it in some tangible way, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So when we started focusing on the low latency piece, we get deeper into like the debouncing. That's why also with optical switches, you don't really have a long debounce time.
Right.
I won't get too much in the technical piece, but let's say that helped a lot with lower latency, and you can make now these claims of like low debounce, etc.
Did it help that at the same time, mouse manufacturers were sort of embracing this optical technology and really pushing the idea that even mouse switches didn't need debounce anymore, and they were really focused on putting analog switches in the mice? Like, did the fact that these other companies were kind of marketing that at the same time, did that help create a wave for you in that lane?
I don't know, in relation to mouse, not necessarily, but the fact that there were other keyboards, optical keyboards out there, and they were doing like latency claims out there. Yeah, and I think ironically now, I think those are a lot of Chinese manufacturers that were really jumping on the optical train and really like we see with the HE keyboards now and the whole magnet switches stuff. That time it was optical switches.
Right.
And it was like, it's either going to it's either going to be a thing or it's not going to be a thing. And the concept of optical switch at that point was it's lower latency. Yes. And that how do you say that? That also that relation was also made with our keyboards because we now have an optical keyboard at the time. Yeah.
So that brings about a really interesting point then. The switch between optical and Hall effect. Where did Hall effect come from? Where did the idea to put that into a keyboard even come from?
Okay, so our focus was shifting more and more towards this idea of, okay, we need to focus more on latency. But we never let go of this idea of analog movement or analog input. So we're now just thinking about, okay, we have analog input. How can we leverage this in a latency way, right? Like for latency. And in our very first keyboard, we already had an adjustable activation point.
Right.
But that point was very limited. This optical switch only had like, oh my gosh, was it starting 1.4 millimeters up to 3.6 or something?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was very limited. And it was very frustrating also because even for the analog movement stuff, because we can only detect a piece of the range, it was very hard to 100% make sure what that signal was going to look like because we couldn't see the beginning. Like when you're pressing the key, like we don't know how far down you're pressing it because we don't even see, we don't see the starting point. We just see at 1.4 millimeter, okay, something is pressing now, right?
Wow.
But every switch will be like maybe 1.2, 1.6 maybe, right? There's going to be a tolerance range and, you know, then you get to 3.6 and it's like, okay, you're probably at the end, but there's like another 0.4 millimeters left. That was very challenging.
Yeah, it sounds very challenging.
Yeah, and it was very frustrating as well. So when we're looking at that point, we're saying, okay, no matter what, first of all, we pushed our manufacturer, like, you know, you got to invest into getting like full range detection. Otherwise, it's not going to work out. You know?
Sure.
I'm in one way or another because this gets to a point I get really frustrated about this. So then I start to get really determined. And I was like, if you don't get the full range, it's not going to work out. We need that full range. And
well, you also have to have there has to be a good deal of precision in the tooling because you need to make sure that you have the same range with as minimal variance. And I know from experience that not every factory is set up. There can be a pretty big discrepancy in equipment between, you know, you can say, yes, this is exactly 3.6 or, you know, it could be 3.3 or 3. You don't really know, right? So that's another layer on top of trying to solve that.
This was like the biggest pain for making those Wooting 1, Wooting 2 keyboards.
Yeah.
Why the Wooting 1 even got delayed, we had to throw away all the PCBAs of the first production because we found out in the end, like, first of all, they didn't pass our like analog test, and which was like measuring the starting and ending point and kind of, you know, is the signal okay or not okay? Some OG people might remember our analog machine. It's literally a machine that has like a bunch of these prongs, and then it would like 0.1 millimeter steps go down, and then we'd measure every voltage amount that would come out of each switch to make sure that, you know, everything was in range. But then, oh my gosh, you get into things like, but every keycap, every switch tolerance is a bit different. So the heights are not all the same.
Right.
Yeah. So you had to like calibrate then. Right? And I was like, how to like standardize this so we can actually do a larger volume production. It was like a real pain. And then we found out, okay, within every switch, there's like a lens. Yeah. Every lens has like a cavity. Every cavity is like slightly different. So we give like the combination of this lens with this housing has like a different
just another variable on top.
Yeah, it was such a pain. Yeah. And that was, I would say that was the second part where we're saying, like, if we get the full range, right, then we can at least know the starting point, we know the ending point, and then the software we can, you know, easy fix.
You can work out the rest.
Yeah. So that was also like, we really had to move on. And at that point, thankfully, there was this development in the industry in the background, like, okay, Hall sensors, switches with magnets. And at that time, we had Huano, the switch maker Huano, and Gateron were working on these type of switches.
Were they working on them specifically for a keyboard in the gaming market, or was there some industrial application they were being used for?
I have to be honest, I think SteelSeries at that time was already working on a Hall effect keyboard with Gateron. And now knowing the industry a bit better, how it goes with a lot of Chinese manufacturers is like, okay, one manufacturer is working on something, okay, everybody knows about it. Yeah. No matter what, everybody knows about it, right? It's not even their intention for that information to go around, but you just need like one employee or one operator that is like they're temporary to
have a conversation with someone else and word spread, especially when it's a novel idea.
Yeah, exactly. And it gets underestimated. Like you have operators like assembling stuff. But then after like Lunar New Year, they leave and then they go back, and then whoever pays the most, they're going to assemble there, right? And then they've seen the inside of the factory of their competitors, right? And, they can also talk. So it's like, it all spreads around really, really fast.
Right.
So, I can't tell like what kickstarted all of it, right? But I can tell you had sensor manufacturers and you had switch manufacturers doing something with Hall sensors and magnet switches and trying to figure out how to make that in keyboards. But they just needed clients that could actually bring a product to the market.
They had the technology. They needed a specific use case that made sense. Is that what you mean? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So we had a Hall sensor supplier. We had Huano as a switch supplier. And we're like, let's make a prototype keyboard because let's see how well it works. We made the first prototype. It was really fast. It was super simple. And oh my God, it was like 90%, like it was a boost of like 400% better. Like we immediately got the full range. We didn't do any calibration. Wow. It was like already solved so many problems. And we're like, okay, you know what? This is it. We're not going to do anything else.
Right.
So we at that point said, no matter the next thing is going to 100%, we're going to put into next keyboard has to have this. And this is going to be the way that we're going to go forward. And they were very happy because somebody was willing to make a keyboard with this.
Sure.
And not only willing as, also capable of doing it. Because it's another thing that I learned over time in the industry, like a lot of these brands making these keyboards, they have absolutely no in-house knowledge, like zero.
Right.
Yeah. They just go to the manufacturer, whatever solution they have. Okay, let's put it on a keyboard and let's go with it. There's absolutely no.
So to me, the biggest thing there is firmware. I mean, you have the experience of developing this firmware for the first two pieces, whereas somebody that doesn't have a lot of insight to the product, they can go to a factory now, say, I have an idea for a keyboard. It needs to look like this, feel like this, sound like this, have these features.
Yeah.
And then you kind of get this generic off-the-shelf factory firmware.
Yeah.
But when you're pushing into a new area where that's never been done before, the factory doesn't have that. The manufacturers don't have that knowledge. No. So you're the person coming to the table with that knowledge and that experience.
Well, and this... So yes, and I would also say what the manufacturer can offer can only be within the spectrum of what's available.
Yeah.
But then who understands the customer and what problem are you trying to solve, right? End of the day, it's still the one that's selling the product to the end user.
Right.
Yeah, and that there's a big gap there. That's also why sometimes you see a product coming to the market, you're like, why?
Yeah.
Like, what was the thought behind this, right?
Yeah, who'd they make this for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that makes absolutely no sense. Yeah. But that was the benefit. So with the manufacturer we worked with, we already did the whole PCBA design, so the electronic piece. We already did all the firmware on the PCBA. That's a big piece of our, core value.
Right.
And then we also did the software on the PC side. So we only needed the manufacturer to just basically manufacture what we needed, what we had already designed.
And that's a relationship I'm sure they love because they just get to focus and do what they do.
Well...
No, not really.
No, because this is the trick. If you're an OEM manufacturer, you want to offer something that is so appealing that you don't switch to a different factory. Because if they don't have that unique thing that makes you stick with them, then you're going to...
Traditionally go with the lowest cost option, right?
There's always like a quality cost thing happening. But if you take one of the bigger brands, right, the way it works is that they have this idea for a product. Then they're going to like make a product requirement document and say like, it needs to be do this and that and that. And everybody does a little bit different how deep they go, right? And then they're going to send that document under confidentiality to these different manufacturers. And every one of them is going to send back a quotation, like for how much can they make this?
Sure.
Some manufacturers go extra cheap because they want to reel in that client into their factory and get them to run the product with them. They have some kind of a strategy behind it. Others will quote it for what it is, right? They're all a little bit different. But, the power is with the brand to say like which manufacturer to go with. So if you're a manufacturer and you have this, let's say the manufacturer would have this like proprietary HE stuff, right? And nobody else has that. You can lock in your customer. Yeah. And the other way they do it is like when you open a mold with one of these factories, right? Every mold maker is a bit different. You can't just take one mold and then move to a different mold maker and be like, let's do it here, right? So they're going to have certain documents there are two parts. One is that mold maker has a specific specialty and it just sits there. So you can just not move it out. Mm. The other one is every mold has like specific 2D documents to understand deeply how the mold's put together and how the injection is done. They don't share those documents. So you can't just move around to different factories of your product. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So their goal is to lock you in so they can keep producing your product.
Sure.
Yeah. But with us, then the way I operate in general, that's not really an option. In this case, with the firmware, with the PCBA, right?
Yeah.
So, if a manufacturer is happy with it or not, they would be very, very happy if they can like learn something, leech something off of this and then offer it to the other customers. That would be great. Or we get so big, right? And we stick with them, and that's also really great. But yeah, it's not necessarily the immediate appealing part. Yeah.
It's interesting. So we've got to the point then where it sounds like the product is coming together. What does the run up for the launch look like for the 60HE?
Right. So the funny thing is that since we're very cash strapped with everything that we do,
Sure.
But now we wanted to do this whole effect version, and we were like, okay, let's take an existing mold, an existing product, which is the Wooting 2, and make a whole effect version of this. And we're going to do like limited edition style because we're kind of like, how can we attract enough people with this?
Mm-hmm.
And so then we launched the Wooting 2 Lekker Edition.
I remember this, yeah.
Yeah. And that was kind of our way of like, okay, we need the funds to do this development. That thankfully went well as well. I must have raised around the same. We've always raised at that time like $150,000. That was up to 1,000 keyboards.
Like, to put that in perspective, though, that's not a lot of money to go into these undertakings with.
No, but we're still with 3 people, thankfully. So
Minimal overhead in terms of the size of the operation, just in terms of the manufacturing process, that's not.
No, it's not.
If you're not familiar with the industry, it sounds like a big resource. It's not a lot of money to go in.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And that's why we're also like, okay, we have to leverage what we have. So we leveraged our Wooting 2 product as the molds, but we just need to change the PCBA. At least that was the thought at the time.
Right.
But during the development, us also being us is kind of like, we have these Huano switches and they just don't sound really great. And we're like communicating with them and telling like, you need to make some changes to the switch because it just, it works, but it's on the sound department, the feeding department, it's not working.
So you were
out.
conscious of that early on?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah. Because we, at that time was also growing. That enthusiast market has always been on our radar. What is happening there, because there's so much you can learn from there as well.
Right.
Yeah, and that time I was like, okay, but keyboard's very personal. You interact with it. The feeling and the sound really decides also like how much you're going to love this product.
I mean, it felt, the reason that's surprising to me is because it felt for a long time like people that were doing gaming keyboards had no concept of what the expectation was or why a board even needed to sound better. And in some cases didn't even realize that their board didn't sound good. I've had really awkward conversations about that with brands in the past. So it's interesting to me that you had your eye on that at the same time that you were developing this. So you're with Huano and you're looking where at this point?
Yeah, and it kept stalling. And at some point, COVID arrived.
Oof.
And it was, they decided, we're going to focus on our core stuff. We're not going to do this R&D anymore on this mold. You take it or you leave it with how the switch is. And I just felt like, no, so thankfully at that time, Gateron was already doing a switch development also, magnet switch development.
Mm-hmm.
And then I happened to have a conversation with them, and they have an open mold option for these switches because, mind you, that time they released a Steel Series keyboard with the OmniPoint switches.
So the original Apex.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that was all like they worked on that time. And in conversation found out, hey, they're going to have an open mold option. So then looked at, okay, when can we get these type of switches? And that's kind of where it started like, okay, we can actually pivot now towards these Gateron switches. That's going to work out because it tried the switches. It's a lot better in terms of sound, and we don't need to do a whole lot anymore on this. The only problem was that they had the magnet in the middle and not on the sides. And the Huano switch had the magnets on the side, not in the middle.
Interesting.
If you'd asked me what my preference would have been at that time, I would have argued the side part would have actually been more beneficial.
Yeah. Can Can you give me the short version reasoning behind that without getting without a 30-minute technical deep dive into why?
Well, what we were able to do with the Hana one is we'd be able to, on the PCB board, we were able to SMD like all the IC parts on the top surface.
Mm-hmm.
And on the bottom, we barely need anything.
Ah.
Yeah. And that alone is a huge benefit because that means, well, from my perspective, because we have, when you don't have any of the IC parts in the bottom, you can actually lower down the whole PCBA.
Sure.
More down.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm all about, I want that front row of the keyword to be as low as I can get it.
Yeah.
But now with the magnet in the middle and having everything on the bottom,
right,
you need to keep a gap there to keep the IC parts also safe.
Makes sense. Yeah.
That was a big driver. Then there's some other pieces also about like how you would have switch compatibility maybe in the future, kind of imagining like if you have other switches, like what is like
you were thinking that far forward about people going with different switch options.
Yeah, different switch options. Yeah, exactly. Because it's gonna go one way or another, whoever kind of sets that standard. And I was thinking, if you want to do different layouts, like, is that gonna be interfering or not? And having that sensor like right in the middle was gonna be troublesome. Yeah. Yeah. And but at that time we were not as far when it came to signal and let's say more the things that we know now. I don't know how that would have been with that magnet on the side, right? So that's also you don't know, but
all right, so take me up now. You've got the HE ready to go, and you've opted for a 60%, which I know was a point of contention for some people on launch. Was that a holdover from the decision to use mold, or was there a conscious effort to go with the 60% versus a different layout?
Well, because the reason why I'm building up a lot towards the 60 HE is because we went through a lot of things before we got to the 60 HE overall.
Okay. All right.
And when we locked down on the technology piece and we found out, well, this is amazing, right? We were also thinking about now that we have this full range, how can we, introduce features, but now in relation to latency. And that's where rapid triggers started to come up. And you can see one very, very early video with the Lecker edition already, where I'm showing the rapid trigger feature. And at that time we had no idea what the impact would be. But as we were rolling out the keyboards, we found out that it had a significant impact for the end users themselves. And they were coming back with this feedback. We're like, okay, we got the right thing here, right? We're going into the right direction now.
Yeah.
But now we need to consolidate that all together into a message that really will resonate with, that target group that is communicating this. And that happened to be a Fortnite community.
That's totally believable. Fortnite was a monster at that time.
And they were like, they were showing all kinds of things. Like it started with the double movement stuff, where our keyboards could do something very specific. Because we had the controller and keyboard stuff at the same time, we could do double movement without needing double binding the keyboard stuff. And that got us like a lot of popularity in Fortnite. And then it was, okay, we're now going to develop this keyboard. And when we bring out this keyboard, we also need to appeal to that Fortnite audience. In the development, though, we were actually developing a 65% keyboard because.
Go on.
And, for very, very like common reasons where we felt we love the small compact keyboard. Yeah. We don't love not having arrow keys.
Right. I think that's everyone. Yeah.
But during the development, we also found out like we went pretty far. Like because we were also in that enthusiast market, we're already thinking, okay, how are we going to do this gasket mounting style for the 65%? But we want to do it our own way. And we had this idea of like, we can gasket it and then you can change the gaskets with a different shape of silicone. And the shape would kind of change your stiffness of the whole gasket mounting thing.
Yeah.
And mind you, that time now we're with 5 people. And one of them is the 2 extra ones. One is Kevin, which the head industrial designer now. Another one is Simon. And he's basically end game software developer at Wooting, and no mechanical engineer. And the thing with the 65 was that we had 2 problems. One was this was a wildly new idea. We had no idea if it could actually work, and it was pretty risky to go through with it. And the second problem was like we had absolutely no money to invest in all these molds that would be required in order to make this keyboard.
Right.
And we need to kind of make a decision. We can, if we're going to like launch this keyboard, because we have to do a campaign to get the funds, can we deliver doing this 65%? And it's like, it's going to be very challenging, right? So then we're thinking, okay, we really need to bring this to the market no matter what. So let's just simplify this. And I was like, okay, well, let's just go to the next best thing at that time. Let's make a 60% layout. Because if we do the 60% layout, then we can just go and, if we can't afford the mold, we can just take any existing mold on the market.
Yeah, it's pretty universal. The 60% tray mount was a very universal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And even so, I had a contact that was already making these 60% keyboards, and they had the mold. And I was like, we could just buy that mold otherwise, or we can just like share the mold or something. And as long as we can prove and show to people that this thing that we have is really amazing, right? And then we can go into the more complicated stuff. It's okay. So that was always the backup plan. At least we have a PCBA that's 60% tray mount, and we can always release it in this way, and I don't go with other manufacturing mold. So we get through the development. We obviously make our own case for the campaign.
Right.
And then Kevin, our industrial designer, he was like, because we had that Fortnite audience, we also, in that Fortnite audience is very much about this piece of, I need to show you something that I have of all the skins, right? He kind of tells a story about who am I, or what's my status in the game,
sure.
Right? And we're like, we also need to have a strong identifier of this keyboard, because a lot of these 60% keyboards, they're just like rectangular and,
There's all the actions on the back, right? There's nothing looking down at the board. There's really nothing to set one apart from the other.
Exactly.
Right.
So Kevin proposed like, hey, what if we just attach the strap on
wrist
the side?
strap. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, well, you know what? That's pretty dope. I really like, it's pretty wild, but it's probably appealing.
I found that to be so polarizing, and I could never understand why, because I think there was a misunderstanding that the intention was for it to be a functional thing and not an aesthetic thing. And I think people, is what do I need this stupid handle on my keyboard that's already and it's like, no. It looks, it's like a flight strap. Like it looks a certain type of way. It was an aesthetic piece. And I think there was a big disconnect with that with some of the end users. Yeah, that's interesting.
For sure. And it's, but it did its magic, because it was very, very iconic, and it really like set it apart from all those other keyboards. So we went with that. Then we went to the piece of like, okay, let's now launch it on our website. But at that time, we already didn't do any launches on Kickstarter anymore, because one of the big learning points was like, if we want to run this as a business and we want to like have a continuous thing going on, we should step away from the Kickstarter model, is what I call it. And we don't want to be associated with Kickstarter if we have a breakthrough, because then you become that Kickstarter company.
Right.
And we're definitely not a Kickstarter type company. That it's about getting the biggest funding ever, right? Get all that recognition for it, and then a few years down the line, the whole business failed. Yeah. Almost every Kickstarter story goes in this direction.
Nobody really talks about the back end of that. Everybody champions the story of what it looks like when they raised the money and launched the product, but you don't hear a lot about what it looks like for them 3 to 4 years later, and that makes perfect sense as to why you don't. Yeah.
So that and we had the big benefit. We were reeling in a lot of our own customers. So with the 6HE, also launching our own website, and we launched it, and it raised, for that time, the most we had ever raised for a keyboard. It was like $250,000. And it felt like, oh yeah, okay, whoa, okay. We think we've now consolidated that message that we wanted in this keyboard. We found synergy with a target group that wants this type of keyboard.
Right.
And of course, about the arrow piece, right? It was like, we all want arrow keys. We're like, well, just implement ModTap. Right. And ModTap was not necessarily like a new thing that we invented. It was something that you could find on QMK type of keyboards already.
Yeah.
But you would have to program it.
Sure.
Yeah. And there was no keyboard out there implementing it by default. And it's like, why?
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. So we implemented that by default. And because we're already looking at the enthusiast market also, and we're keyboard users ourselves, we're like, tray mounting, 60%, it's universal. We know the poker keyboards where it started.
Yeah.
Right? So that was also a feature for us. Like, we really wanted to have that in there.
That to me, I think I mean, don't get me wrong, and I'm not trying to glaze too hard here, but Rapid Trigger obviously an incredible breakthrough that had it's really rare that somebody who manufactures a keyboard aimed at performance gaming says this is a game changer, and then it turns out to actually be a game changer. It's usually way more marketing than it is tangible. And Rapid Trigger was really one of those things. Now, I always joke because the first review I did of that keyboard, I said in the beginning, I was like, this is the best gaming keyboard on the market. And my very next sentence is every YouTuber says wild stuff at the beginning of the video to keep you watching the video, but I'm going to show you why that's a legitimate statement. And, here we go. Because Rapid Trigger was something you could actually look at and go, wow, shit, that is really a game changer. But for me, the turning point, at this point, I was so deep in the custom keyboard hobby that a lot of people were wondering why I was even bothering covering a gaming keyboard, a traditional gaming keyboard. But that light bulb moment where it's like, you can take this entire PCB out. Not only can you put, whatever keycaps you want on it, but you can lift the entire assembly out and put this in a $400 case if that's what you want to do, if that's what you want it to look like. And it opens up a lot more about what you can do with the sound. And so that specifically, if I go back even now and read the comments under those videos, it was like, I was prepared to ignore this, but you have my attention, just because of that, that little moment right there where it was like, wow, so this isn't and I always wondered if the universal was, if that was intentional, if you were watching the market and you knew that you wanted that level of customization out of that, or if it was just a happy accident, because those things happen sometimes. Like sometimes it just, it worked out like this and it just kind of worked out that way. But it sounds like you were pretty conscious of what that was going to look like.
Yeah, we were. So it was always the fallback plan. And we knew, because I'm also part of that enthusiast market. I never went super deep, like deep community group buys, for example, right?
Sure.
That always went too far for me, but I'm always like, obviously I want a great sounding keyboard. Like my first mechanical keyboard at the time was a Ducky keyboard, I think. Yeah, the first one I tried at somebody else was one of those Steel Series when they had like a very early stage, like one of those cherry black switches, also really heavy, a G something keyboard. Yeah. But feeling those keyboards, it just felt amazing to type on. And I was like, oh shit, I want to use it to type now in general. And that always stuck with me. So I've always had this idea of like, okay, well, obviously I want my keyboards to feel great, right?
Right.
And the whole thing with the poker keyboard, like poker was, I think, it was the poker keyboards, I think, that really introduced that idea of a 60% tray mount. And the community at that time was using that as a standard to make other 60% versions. And thankfully at the time, they were very focused on like, we can just grab that PCBA and then it's a very simple tray mount and just, install it. And they had all kind of custom cases. So when we get to that point for the 60HE and promoting this as a feature as well, was like, this is the dope part about the 60% in general. But then I thought actually at the launch, it would have been a much more spoken of item, but it wasn't.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So from the feedback we're getting from our target audience it was very focused on the keyboard overall and then the rapid trigger stuff, just actuation things, right? And how latency is a big thing, which is great because that's also the thing we wanted to focus on.
Sure. Yeah.
But this like customized 60% case stuff didn't really get like a lot of acknowledgement in the very beginning from our end users immediately.
Do you think that's because, I know I felt this a lot when I was making keyboard content on both sides of the fence, is that it's the gaming keyboard, that was almost like people would say that with like a slight degree of disdain. Oh, it's a gaming keyboard, because you had this idea in your head of what it was going to sound and what it was going to feel like. And so it was, the customs over here and gaming over here. I don't know that there were a lot of people that were really embracing both sides. I know tons of custom keyboard enthusiasts that don't even play games. They use their keyboard for coding or for other aspects of their life, and it's not a gaming thing at all. And I think it was probably difficult to find people that really rode both sides of that could speak about both sides of that. And that was something that was, it was a natural fit for me at the content I was making at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, because actually at that time, if you would make a keyboard recommendation, you'd ignore all the gaming stuff, right? Just because latency wise, it didn't feel like it made a huge difference anyway. You just recommend the one that was the best price, quality, and experience. And all those gaming ones were just overpriced muck that oversold what they do.
That was definitely the public perception of that as well. I think the customer perception of that was, I'm paying for all this marketing. This is a $12 keyboard that doesn't really offer me any enhanced performance.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's also, and that comes a bit back to that feeling for me that stereotype of gaming and which direction had taken. Because when I think back about the origins of like gaming products, right, there are some genuine things in there that felt like, hey, this is now more tailored towards how I use the keyboard. And maybe a very, very basic example is anti-ghosting. I mean, I haven't heard that for a long time, right?
Not a long time, yeah.
Yeah. And that was
in-key rollover. That's something, you just don't hear about that anymore. Yeah, it used to be a feature,
Yeah, and that made it gaming, because we all understood that if you use a keyboard for gaming, you're going to use WSD and you're going to use left shift, and it all has to work simultaneously, instantaneously.
Right.
But with the original keyboards, the way how it was wired, you could not press shift W and D, for example, at the same time.
Right.
That was a big problem. That's a movement you want to make. And so you had the whole like N-key rollover, the anti-ghosting stuff happening. That made a lot of sense, but that shifted towards things being just about RGB lights at some point, and like who can do the most RGB.
Yeah,
you're not wrong. Yeah, and that was also the thing that really, really annoyed me, because it's just like, okay, well, is this now the definition for like a gaming keyboard? Like, why are we not tailoring towards things like what are gamers actually doing, right? And how are we making something that actually makes it something for gaming? And that's always been that annoyance. So going now to 60HE was also like, okay, I'm just trying to make a really great keyboard for a gaming audience. Like, it's still a keyboard. And we can learn from the enthusiast market what makes a really great keyboard. Right? I can learn from the gamer what is important. And that's what we've been picking up on over time. We had the analog movement thing first, right? And then we're like, okay, latency is actually a big thing, but how do you do like low latency? What does it mean, right? And that's also why the rapid trigger idea came. Like, okay, how can we use what we have, but then solve a problem that we acknowledge now in this scene? It's also how with Fortnite, how did we even do the Fortnite double movement thing? Was because I think he had double movement was done by Benji Fishy, where he would double bind his keyboard left or right strafe key, and then he could do two different angles, if I'm right. So you would press a regular strafe, you would strafe, let's say not 45, but let's say like a 30 degrees or something, right? But if you'd press the second binded strafe movement, you would now strafe at about like 60 degrees. And it's like super off-putting if you've been trained to like follow movement of a 30-degree strafe.
Right.
Now changes and especially in close combat, you're like circling around a person, which with normal strafe you cannot. You're like moving, right?
Right.
And it's really, really off-putting, and that got Benji Fishy like in the championships, whatever, right? And it was
because nobody had a way to combat that.
No,
as an opponent, there was nothing you could do about that, right?
And I have to also say then, just give a small compliment there, is that what I really, and a remark, is what I really, 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 really miss in esports overall, right? Pro gamers being creative with their devices and with how they play in the game. Like, they're sticking so much with what is known, and they're not experimenting enough with what you could do and increase the skill ceiling.
Meaning they're focusing more on the meta, the commonly accepted meta, as opposed to experimenting and getting outside the lines a little bit. Yeah, that makes sense.
And I really, really miss that. But that's what happened at that time. And then it was like, okay, Fortnite said, well, that double binding keyboard stuff, we're not going to do that. With our keyboard, you could get exactly the same thing, but you just combine the joystick with the keyboard.
I see.
And you can get the same angles, even so you can control the angle.
Was that well received, or was that a thing where people are like, well, this is cheating, you shouldn't be allowed to do this? What did that look like?
It was more like people were buying our Wooting 1 keyboards at the time and then keeping it a secret because it was a huge advantage, right?
Yeah.
And I at one point had a conversation on Twitter with one of our customers, and he's like, dude, you know about this Fortnite double movement thing? I'm like, no, explain it to me, right? And he's like showing it, and I'm like, aha, okay, right? And learned from end user, and it's like, okay, how can we now tailor towards this? So that's where we started with, like, finding those people and tailoring the future more towards, and we eventually released the double movement software also.
Right. As a standalone, it accommodated any keyboard, right?
Yes, exactly. So you don't need a Wooting keyboard. You can now do it for any keyboard.
And you guys charge how much for that software?
Yeah, it was completely free.
Right.
Yeah.
That's wild. Yeah, that's wild.
And it's this also then with the 60HE, it's kind of the same thing, you know. It's like, okay, well, what are we hearing? What are we picking up on? And then how can we implement this into the product? And I always feel also with my role, I always feel like sometimes people ask me like, what games do you play?
Right.
I'm like, I used to play a lot of games, but
I'm busy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I could just not afford to play anymore.
Absolutely.
And you know what, how I learned the most actually is not so much about me playing. It's about asking questions from the people that are playing.
Yeah. And I think that's so like the through thread that I'm picking up on every move you've made is that there has to be, there's the realization that there's a problem, or the realization that there's either something that you need to solve or something that people have discovered that you need to lean into, but everything operates, there's a purpose.
Yes.
It's not releasing a product for the sake of releasing a product.
That's right.
And it's definitely not releasing a product for the sake of like, oh, let's just make this a moneymaker. This is,
100%.
So yeah, everything sounds real. Like since the very beginning, everything sounds very intentional. Like if there's not purpose behind it, then it's not the right direction to go.
Exactly.
That feels like that's the philosophy.
Yeah, you nail it 100%. Yeah. That's also why when you look at what we release, right? We get questions about mouse, for example, right?
Yeah.
Because there's this perspective of like, well, if you do keyboards, now you can do mouse and it would be great with your software. And I acknowledge it. Yeah, it's true, right? But we're not ready for mouse. We want to focus on what we're good at right now. We want to keep that focus, and we don't want to release a mouse or a gaming chair or now these other things.
You want to do a headset?
Yeah. Just because we have the brand now, we have some reach, right? And then get you to buy all the Wooting stuff.
You could sell it. You could sell the ecosystem. I'm sure you could.
We could, yeah.
But that's something that you'll hear me say a lot is that this keyboard is what you guys do.
Yeah.
You're not buying a keyboard from people that make 20 different things. You're buying a keyboard from people that are super passionate about making sure that this keyboard does what it's supposed to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing. The underlining piece there for us is that we really just really enjoy doing it. And we just want to keep enjoying doing it. And this is the way how we enjoy doing it. So that's how we just operate going forward always. Yeah.
So from the outside looking in, the 60HE looked to be, I know you said it had raised $250,000 on the first. Yeah. It seemed like the demand was absolutely insatiable as soon as it came out. Like there was just no way to meet the demand. And I think at the time I'm sure there were COVID challenges at the time too with manufacturing. It was still kind of in that window.
I would say that between the Lekker edition and the 60HE, there was a lot happening on COVID stuff. And by the time we got with the 60HE, COVID was kind of getting to an end.
Okay.
Yeah. So thankfully that didn't get too much in the way, but COVID itself was definitely challenging for development. Yeah.
And so obviously at this time, the content creation market has exploded. There's, between live streamers, and I think COVID, it kept people captive. And so I think a lot of people saw an opportunity to become content creators in that window. So at this point in time, as this keyboard is getting into the hands of the end users and specifically people who have audiences, what did that initial demand feel like on your end versus some of the previous launches? I mean, was it just like a rocket ship that you had no idea how you were going to hold on to? Like, what did that feel like internally?
Yeah. So what we
Because at this point, you're still 5 people, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. After the campaign, we started to hire more people. Yeah. Because we felt like, okay, first of all, on the customer service point, like you have to imagine we're also doing customer service, just the 5 of us also. It was very, very time consuming. Right. And we felt like, okay, we now really need to start offloading these time consuming pieces that just, you can't solve it in one time. It's just like a continuous.
Yeah. You're not going to move the product forward if you're answering emails all day.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So, and then the other piece was a piece of administration I needed more help with. I was also doing all the admin, all the bookkeeping, all the accounting.
The actual running of the business piece that a lot of people forget exists.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of work, and I needed somebody to help with the admin pieces to save my own time. Yeah. So those were the first 2 extra. We're at 7. Yeah, and from the campaign up until delivery, sales never like skyrocket or something because you still can need to prove something. So it's really the matter of the people that went into the campaign, how much they are, how convinced of this are they, and how
Right.
much reputation have we built up. And then when we get to the launch and it starts delivering, that's really the moment where, you know, you're going to see the real impact of the product. So I think the delivery is like 3/4 of a year further versus the campaign launch. And we started doing deliveries. And in the beginning, it was okay, silent, not too much difference, right? And then I think by the time you came out with your video, that was I think that was the first video that really, really was able to bring over the right message, what the 6HE was about.
Well, I appreciate that. That was an undertaking. I know I've told you this offline before, but I don't generally communicate with the brand or the manufacturer throughout the process of making a video. But it seemed like every time I thought I had a handle on what that keyboard was capable of, it's like, oh, and it also does this. And it's like, oh, and then it's like back to the drawing board trying to figure out how to properly showcase this. And at the end of it, like, usually when you're a content creator, you budget a certain amount of days to accomplish a project. And so like the budget on that was like 6 days. So I thought I could knock it out in like 6 days. It wound up being like 3 weeks because it did so much. It was little things you wouldn't think about. Like we talked so much about interference from keycaps at the time because a lot of enthusiasts use GMK keycaps. And if the switch is too big, then it bottoms out too early. It sounds real bad. And, the light bulb moment was like, well, the way it's shaped, you could just rotate it exactly 180 degrees. And I was like, no. I popped it out and turned it around. I was like, I'll be damned, it works. And it was, I enjoyed the process thoroughly, but that video was a huge undertaking because it just, if something's going to do something, it's my job to tell you exactly everything that it does. And that keyboard it's just like a Swiss Army knife. It just never ran out of things to demonstrate. Yeah, it was a lot. Yeah.
I can imagine also once you have to talk through a lot of features, it's like, how can you condense this in like a short amount of time?
Yeah. Hopefully, because traditionally I can't do a 45-minute long review. It has to, it has to have a flow and kind of move along. So it was a fun, challenging project. Yeah.
It was always been a challenge for us. Also, the previous keyboard, just to kind of explain the things that it could do.
Right.
And because a lot of the reviews at the time also were like, okay, well, I have this set list of things you go through, and software is like, it's easy or it's not so easy. It's okay, it's not okay.
Right. You got a couple features, you can kind of change the lighting around. You can do some key rebinds, some maybe macro programming, and you're in and out and it's done, right? That's it. Yeah.
But this is the piece where we spend a lot of time and where it makes a huge difference. And it unpacks like a whole lot of stuff all of a sudden.
It does. Yeah. So demand starts to increase at this point, right?
Yes. So, that's when it was starting to pick up, and the network effect also started to become a big play. And then the next big move was when Optimum also came out with a video.
Sure.
And that gave it another spike up. And then over time, we're like, okay, whoa, like I was telling you earlier, like we've always been looking at these other businesses, and we're like how are they doing it? Like I remember it being in a manufacturer, and the manufacturer's like saying, we're making this steel plate for this customer, and we're doing like 30,000 a month. And I'm like, how can you do 30,000 a month? That's impossible. You know, it's really hard to imagine scale
it like that.
Yeah. And but now we're actually in a trajectory towards the same scale, and it's like, okay, so what's next? How it can't grow any bigger. Like this is good. Like we're satisfied. It's okay.
Right.
But then it just kept growing and growing. And every like quarter, every half year, it was like we doubled again. It's like, okay, crap.
It was difficult to get a Wooting for a long time. That was, I was hearing that from viewers. It's like, great, but I don't want a keyboard 6 months from now.
Yeah.
I want a keyboard right now.
Yeah, and that was the biggest challenge, because now we opened up a whole new chapter, which was how to manufacture at such a huge scale. Because we used to manufacture in a way where it's like, okay, we just do a few thousand, and then that was it for the quarter. For the manufacturer, well, it's easy. It's peanuts for them,
Sure.
But now we're getting to this point where it's like, well, the manufacturer's like, well, you need to open another mold. or we need to open up more assembly lines because we don't have the capacity otherwise to do this in a month, right?
Wow.
And it's like, wait, we can't like produce everything we need for a long time in a month.
Right.
Yeah, that was wild. That was like, this whole new world of manufacturing at scale. And that was kind of I would say that was the thing that was one reason why that was the biggest. Was that the biggest? We could keep up with the demand in an operational sense. We just couldn't keep up with the demand on a manufacturing sense.
Right.
And we didn't know how to scale that properly. But we did our best and we increased our productions as well. And the very, very scary part as a small player, especially when, at that time, you're always being very cash strapped, especially,
Sure.
is that, you feel like you're going to reach a peak and then it's going to significantly drop. Yeah.
The bottom's going to fall out.
Yeah.
And then if you have all this money that you've invested in manufacturing, or you have all this product sitting on the shelf,
That's right.
you don't have cash. Your cash is product at this point in time.
Yeah.
And so what happens when that's got to be the fear, right?
That's the continuously.
We saw that happen in the custom keyboard industry after, when that eventual hangover hit, and that affected a lot of people that, a lot of smaller retailers, a lot of smaller manufacturers, that it definitely affected people. That has to be a concern.
Yeah. And this was like, because first of all, we can't imagine skill. We don't know what the new normal is going to be. And is it just going to be like a hype, for example, right? This is going to be short term.
It's going to fizzle out. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you can't, you just can't imagine it. So, but instead of it like dropping at some point, it would just keep growing. Yeah. So thankfully though, before we did the campaign launch, we already made a couple of moves to kind of be able to scale, because we've when I was talking with the team at that time, we were talking to 5 people at the time, it was always about, okay, we're doing these developments, right? But we all know we have something here that it's some point, it's going to change everything. And then we're going to have the hockey stick moment. And the hockey stick moment is the moment you have that huge curve up. Yeah. So we already prepared on this from a fulfillment side. So we worked with third-party fulfillment. We got our stuff there ready with the 60HE stuff. We did it on the software side with how to fulfill the orders.
I think people wildly underestimate the strategy, the logistics that goes into satisfying the demand. Manufacturing is one thing, but getting it into the hands of everybody in every region all over the world is a completely different challenge that you have to solve. Yes,
exactly. So thankfully, we were already thinking in terms of how can we scale this if we get the hockey stick moment, and that helped a lot. But it was not enough.
Yeah.
So it's growing. And I think also last year, maybe last year in the first half year, we were thinking okay, have we now finally plateaued our growth, right? And we're seeing some steady rates, right? And it sounds stupid, okay, but it's also, we're kind of happy to not see the growth happening in the same way anymore, because we really want to make sure we can deliver in stock. We want to, give a good experience overall with the whole line, from go to our website, placing the order, and receiving the keyboard.
You've been in sprint mode for so long that it's nice to have some breathing room to go back and kind of fortify the foundation and make sure that you're where you need to be before you move forward, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, but then Razer came by with the SnapTap thing.
Yeah.
And obviously we had to respond to this.
You had to respond.
Yeah. And I don't understand. This is the dynamic of things that, again, spurred the growth. And it was well, when the SnapTap stuff is over, it's probably going to but no. Yeah. So.
All right. So help me understand, was there a moment when you realized how much impact that you'd made to the keyboard space as a whole? Or were you even willing to accept? Because a lot of times I'll let people say nice things to me, but I'll never, I don't pat myself on the back a whole lot.
Yeah.
But was there a moment when you were we just kind of stood back and you're like, holy shit, look at this thing that we did?
I think because we've been doing it for quite a while, and we know that within the industry itself, in the background, we have a lot of these different players looking at us and observing what are they doing. Because maybe, well, there's some examples out there but then they would have been looking because they know they're doing something and it's a potential threat, right? And if they would grow in some manner, right, we have to have the competing thing there. They're onto something maybe, right?
Was it something where they wanted to compete with you, or did you have situations where, because at this point you're a small-ish independent company, Were there any
even before the 60? Yeah. So
even
it's
before
like,
then?
Once we did the Wooting 1 and going through the Wooting 2, like we had, you name all the big brands, right? We've had a conversation with at least one of them, right? And that conversation is always the same. It's basically about learning more about what we're doing.
Right.
And then because they're always thinking about what is going to be the next thing, like 5 years from now, or 3 years from now. So, and they're seeing what we're doing, like small scale, right? And they're thinking like, oh, maybe this is something and we can not bring to big scale. So we've had those talks as well. And
were people trying to acquire you though? Did anybody big try to just come and say, hey, come be under our umbrella, bring this technology over here? But you probably can't say who, but
no,
was that a factor? Was that a thing?
So I would say before we launched the 60HE, we didn't necessarily have this one big player stating this or luring us towards this thing.
Mm-hmm.
We had more like, okay, let's learn as much as we can from these guys and then take that in and not do anything. And at some point, because we're looking at other business, like we're missing something. Maybe we're just not good at this. We should just focus on this like solution that we have and work with a big brand or sell this to like OEM factory as a solution. Because figured out at that time, we just make the MCU, do all the logic
just
on
go
there.
completely B2B and not do any direct to customer stuff at all.
Yeah. We had some thinking about that because like, we know we have something, but we're just not being able to bring it to market. And that's a learning process, right?
Sure.
But so in that time, we had the industry already monitoring what we're doing. And then after the 60HE launch, that was the moment we actually, because it becomes very obvious. So then we've had some big players also come to us, and it starts always with like, you want to make a keyboard together.
Yeah, you want to collab. Yeah, let's collab. So we can get a look at all that technology.
Yeah. And otherwise, it becomes like, oh, we worked really well together, right? And you see our big network of stuff, and we can take all the burdens away from you as a CEO.
It's such a nice thing to offer you. Yeah, that's great.
So that's the conversation always goes in that direction. But anyway. That has happened, right? But there's absolutely no interest from our side to do this.
Sure.
So then, let me see. Why did we get to the
realizing that you'd made such an impact in the keyboard space with the success of the 60HE?
So from an end user side, right? And from an industry, like from an end user perspective, right? I think that's taken the longest to kind of realize what the impact really is because at that time, everything, you already live kind of in a bubble. And we also realize that we kind of live in a bubble of, only people that interact with our stuff like are in that bubble. Mm-hmm. So you kind of feel like your impact is already there. Like, you know about our keyboard, right? You kind of somehow feel like that, but you also unconsciously know like, yeah, the majority really doesn't know.
Right.
Yeah. And I think there was the one switching point and was that, well, I have to say, I'm not even sure if we fully like. There's not like a aha moment or something. It's more like, it's been slowly growing for me.
To me, it feels. I mean, from the outside looking in, and I know that the perspective's never the same, but it feels like 60HE was just a rocket ship. It felt like that was the rocket ship because you had to. I mean, eventually you had to expand past 7 people. What did it look like when you had to expand the customer service team?
Right. So. That's a good point. It's like my experience of expanding, and especially internally, is different from this experience of like getting acknowledgement of end users and industry about the impact of the keyboard. So, both of them is kind of it's growing on me situation. It's like hard to imagine the scale, but you're just going with it.
Right.
So, from a team perspective, for example, it did go really, really fast. So we knew that we're booking success, right? But you don't know relative to what is that success like? Like what kind of success is that then, right?
Yeah.
So first we grew from 7 to 14.
Oh, that's big.
Yeah. And that was, I think, start of 2023, we clocked in at 14. Then the start of 2024, we clocked in at 30. And then now start of this year, we're at like, at the start of this year was like 68, I think. And now we're about 70 people. Yeah. So it's like doubling.
That's wild.
Yeah. And I think that, well, there's a lot to share about this and what is the impact internally and what does it mean as a company also, like how that changes. But
you have to define a corporate culture. I mean, for a long time, when it's a small group of people, you get a sense of how everybody operates. You know everybody's personality. You understand what everybody's strengths and weaknesses are.
Yeah.
But now that you have to take, and it's second nature because you've worked alongside these people for so long, but suddenly you have this large team. What is it, how do you transfer the values and the just the corporate culture to all these new faces and all these new people that don't have any idea what they're walking into?
Yeah. It's challenging because in the beginning, we actually slowed down how fast we were hiring. So also when you were mentioning customer service, for example, we knew we needed a lot more people for customer service, but we didn't have good ways of scaling that without losing a lot of our identity and things just messing up. So we're and we also had to learn how to do hiring properly.
Right.
We have everything we do is like a first time doing it. So that was the beginning. And then as soon as we got to about 30, we felt more comfortable about hiring. What kind of people are we hiring?
Yeah.
We did our best to retain our culture piece, and retaining a culture piece is just very, very basic. It's very rudimentary. It's just like talk a lot.
Yeah.
And it's just having those one moments with every individual. And then it would be for me, for Erik, for Jeroen to have those moments with the different members.
Yeah.
And then give them the insight and the character, really let them feel you as founders. Because in the end, the whole Wooting stuff is like an embodiment of the three of us.
Yeah.
Like there's like what you experience to see with the Wooting stuff, that's just like a pure translation of how we operate with the three of us. So it's just that communication all the time that made sure that they also embrace this as a culture.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, none of them are from the industry, Like
really?
No. There's like hiring people specifically from the industry, like with the background in the industry.
Yeah.
We have only very, very few people that we've actually brought in, which is, I don't know, at that time, I was so afraid that if we bring in somebody that has done like 8 years at Corsair, Razer, or SteelSeries, or like one of those brands, right? They're going to start like instilling culture
that they brought over from.
And the ways of working, how to operate, right? And if there's one thing is like, I do not want to operate in the way they operate. I want to, and if this happens, right, I don't want to reinvent the wheel of how to operate a business, how to operate these things in general, right? But I definitely want to have a fresh perspective on these things, and I don't want to be heavily influenced. So talking with these individuals, like I've definitely had interviews where I'm just like asking a lot of questions because I'm just curious and I just want to know more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they have all the background, but then, hiring.
But the last thing you want is to sit in a room full of employees and each person has a story that starts with, well, at my other job, we did it this way. Like, well, that's great. But here, that's not how we do it here. We do it like this.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's almost easier to not have to unlearn stuff like that than it is to just hire someone fresh.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why, so we were naturally gravitating towards people that were just not from the industry. And I think a lot of our hires were very, very focused on personality as well. Yeah. Like it's such a big point for us.
Yeah.
So we have some people in the company that are now doing functions they've never done before, right? But with the right personality, just picking up on it really quickly. And then, of course, we also have people that are familiar with the industry to part, and we have people that were end users before. We have a few people on board that were part of our community also for a long time.
Wow.
There's one I have particularly in mind. I was going to say Rocky. Some people know him, but which is really great because they have like a deep knowledge and understanding of our brand and of what we make, and they integrate really, really well. But otherwise, no. Yeah. So now, though, after 30, you can't have those talks anymore. Like there's too many people.
Too cumbersome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just too many people.
And so I'm sorry to interrupt, but you were originally, everything was based in the Netherlands still, right?
Half, because I've been moving between, I was in Taiwan most of the time. I live in Taiwan right now as well.
That was my question.
Yeah.
Because the manufacturing occurs here.
It happens in China.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But then the headquarters of that manufacturer is in Taiwan.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see. So at what point, like what prompted the move? Did you just need to be closer to the action? Was it a QC thing? Did you just want to be closer to where the manufacturing was occurring?
Not work related at all.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
I
that's surprising.
I moved to Taiwan because I met my wife in Taiwan.
Ah,
Yeah. And I would say even that it is, I did a minor for my study. I did a minor in Taiwan.
yeah,
And that was just to throw myself out there and kind of see what else is out there. That's when I also met my wife.
yeah.
But the biggest thing that, other than my wife, the big thing that attracted me to Taiwan was this really, really strong culture of, okay, just, do it. Yeah. And I was really, really missing that in the Netherlands, where it really felt like, but hold on, regulation A, B, C, D. And hey, if you're smart about this, you make the plan and you go for this and that, right? But the actual action part comes way much later.
So it's not nearly as athletic an approach as you'd get to
Yeah.
have.
And Taiwan really, for me, unlocked my inner feelings of like, I have this idea. I just want to, go move forward. I want to do this thing, right? Uh, and I felt like, okay, I can just do it. I can just do it. And that made me, in the end, move to Taiwan. I worked then for 1 year at a CNC manufacturer that did bicycle parts. Yeah, because there's a big bicycle industry in Taiwan.
Yeah.
And they were doing high-end bicycle parts and then CNC machining it. And that's where I had this really big playing ground where I could start thinking about, okay, they wanted to build up their brand and they wanted to sell their product internationally. And they've been trying to do it for a while. And now I could come in and give like my whole own perspective on how to do this. And that's where I really unlocked for myself this of like, I'm just going to throw myself out there, try a whole bunch of stuff and figure it out on the way. And
yeah.
And after that year, that's also when in the meanwhile, start that retail business thing where I'm like, I want to do online sales. Like it really activated me like to do a lot more stuff opposed to my past, which is like go to school, go home, game all day, next day school, go home, game all day. Yeah. And
relatable. Yeah. Yeah. So for time, I want to skip to the part where it seems like it took a really long time for other people to be able to emulate what you were doing. And then it seems like at some point once a couple people got close, it just seemed like the floodgates opened. And now we see a lot of clone boards that operate very similar. And it's created, the term we use is the race to the bottom, where you're constantly trying to beat somebody on price point. And so that becomes the driving factor. How cheap can we get this to market? And that, based on everything you said so far, that sounds like it's in complete contrast to how you've ever operated your business. I haven't heard you mention margins once since we've sat down today and started talking. It doesn't seem like a guiding factor in what you do. How do you how do you continue to differentiate yourself and make people understand the value of going with Wooting over, something they can buy online for $20 or $30? And you had to know that was going to happen eventually, right?
I did not. Yeah, I did. But I did not expect it to happen at this pace. So my thinking was originally that there's a lot of IP you need to build up before you can even do an unlock keyword and you can build in these features. And I thought one of the bigger players were going to be one of the first ones to come in, but that didn't really happen as much. And they caught on a little bit slower. And it's because there is a few or one like OEM manufacturers that were kind of doing development in this direction, but without success. And then they saw we're booking this great success. So they kind of like focused their development this direction.
Sure.
And what that means is once you get an OEM manufacturer that kind of like solves this, right, and creates that piece of IP, you get an off-the-shelf solution.
Yeah. And now it's for sale to anybody that wants to develop a product, right?
That's right. So now you get a lot of like small, medium-sized brands that are going to pick up on it and start selling it. But usually in the first phase of this, the quality and like the actual performance of it all is not that great, but it's good enough for like small to medium-sized brands.
Right.
Yeah, and that picked up much faster than I was anticipating overall, and it was really great. Like this idea from my side was also it's really great to have a runway for ourselves when we introduce this, because we need that runway to kind of establish ourselves a bit better. Because we had a fast growing employee count, we have like a new skill of the company, we need to operate a little bit different, and it gives us some breathing room to kind of figure our things out, and it has done that. but at the same time, it has come a little bit faster than what I was anticipating. And now that we have this situation, it's been a very interesting learning experience, to put it that way.
Yeah.
Because I found out now that once you reach a certain critical point, right, it's not so much about, are you going to be the cheapest? Are you going to be the best price, best spec?
Right.
It's really about, are you going to continue the thing that you originally stood for, the reason why people even wanted to buy your stuff to start with?
Right.
And I think that's kind of where some companies, their tipping point goes towards we're now getting big, so now we need to apply all these models that we know from the big brands already, right? And
we need to maximize profit.
Maximize profit. We need to grow our revenue every year more and more. And we need to increase our volumes. And it becomes suddenly a business that exists for the sake of the business,
right?
Not for the sake of making something for the end user as much. And that's what I've seen in a lot of other gaming companies happen over time. And it, dissociates me with that company as well.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit theory crafting, but I think a Razer, for example, is now a private company again, not a public company again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is also because they probably have noticed that once they go public, the game completely changes.
You're answering to shareholders. You're not answering to end users.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that quarter to quarter results matter a lot. The share price matters a lot. The stress and the pressure points are on all the wrong points. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of my guiding line, because as these competitors have been coming out that for lower prices, they'll make a lot of big claims, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from the outside, without using the product and looking at the claims, it's very, very scary. You're like, oh my God, like, how are they doing this, for this price also? What the hell, you know? Yeah. But then 4 months later, there's like another one. It's like, oh, how are you? And then another one, and then another one. And oh, hey, they're already at version 3. We're still in the same year, right? And so they realize something is that, wait, the boards they're selling are not staying on the desk long enough with the end user.
Yeah, that's always a concern, because you guys, what do you offer right now? It's a 4-year warranty. Is that right?
4-year warranty. Yeah.
I mean, and the thing that always impresses me too is that you don't abandon older products. Like, to the best of your ability, you try to support what's been out there for as long as you can.
That's because there's always been this philosophy with, especially gaming keyboards, is that you buy the keyboard and it comes with a set of software features.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, that's all it'll ever be. Yeah, sure.
Bug fixes maybe, right? Some hot patches, right? That's it.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas from my perspective, especially, we know software as a service been growing a lot, right? Now we're not selling our software. That's not the thing. But having this experience of software the software experience is very, very important, and it can be very helpful. And every hardware product you might have bought, right, always comes with that set software and doesn't really get a lot of development. But a lot of your experience and enjoyment and like what makes it good still comes from the software.
It's the hardware, firmware, software all working together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the piece that I always felt like, okay, so I want to make sure that whenever somebody gets one of our keyboards, they need to have that, that first time experience needs to be good. But over time, when more keyboards come out, they shouldn't be locked out. They should enjoy that ride of getting the new features and experiencing a new thrill with the same product.
Sure. You touched on something important that I want to come back to, because the race to the bottom, it's not always just about cost. There's this thing that happens in the review cycle where the bigger numbers better, right? Or lower numbers better, depending on what your metric is. And so it's also a race to the bottom performance-wise. Like, what I've seen is actuation point.
Right.
0.01. It's
haven't you seen the 0.0005?
Oh, I haven't. I don't feel like I need to. I know from experience that if you I just feel like there's things you can emulate in a testing environment that don't hold any water when you actually try to use the product in real life.
Yep.
Like, personally, like if you got a big sound system and you're trying to run your board at a 0.01, the bass alone is going to cause the keyboard to trigger. If you have like SteelSeries makes a desk that has a magnetic desk pad, and some of the boards I've tested that that flout is, we've got this 0.01 actuation point. The desk mat itself will cause actuation sometimes in whole sections of the board.
Yeah.
And so at what point, because it's kind of a two-headed monster, because at some point, it's just talking about numbers to talk about numbers, and they don't really have any they're not applicable to the actual use case. There's
What you're now saying is your stereotype gaming. It's always been the same. And it repeats itself.
yeah, whether it's polling rate or actuation point
right.
or whatever. But it eventually gets to the point where, yeah, those numbers aren't, they don't,
it means nothing.
it doesn't feel like it means anything.
No.
And on top of that, I still, and you know, I've spent hours and weeks trying to find a universal way to measure and validate claims at home. And I still think that's one of the biggest challenges is coming up with a unified system that we can use to showcase the results and say, you know, is this objectively better than this product? Is it doing what it's advertised to do? And even if it does, how much difference does it make to us? How much time have you guys spent internally trying to come up with a solution where you would be able to maybe not even allow an end user reviewer to validate it, but just to have something that was a little more accessible in that way? Do you have a lot of conversation about that internally?
Oh yeah, definitely. But this is also when those competitors come out and they make these claims, right? And you're like figuring out like, why, right? And then you start using it. Oh, it's not true.
I mean, yeah, there's that aspect too.
So we've been looking also at like, how can we measure this internally? Because we definitely want to learn and get better at what we're doing. So if we can measure this, then we can also have a relative point we can compare with, right? Okay, this is what we're measuring now. We make these changes. Now let's compare to that baseline again. And so internally, that is already very important. But that, let's say, measurement method, it's extremely difficult to do that across different boards.
Yeah, I can vouch for that.
You can take a measurement method and use your own boards and make a comparison in this way, because you can control and understand all the elements that play a variable here. And you have like, as long as the measurement is done the same way, right? You have some kind of like reference point now, right? But when you start taking these other boards into play, it's like you have no idea what's really happening,
right?
And they're all built differently, and the way sometimes the logic of how your press is translated to an input, like there's a certain logic there that's not corresponding, and
we see that. We see different magnet position placements. Heat buildup becomes an issue in certain circumstances because you have an RGB diode so close to the magnetic sensor. Like there's a lot. So it's not like they're just clone stamping the design over and over again. It's more so that they're clone stamping the idea, but how they get there changes to the point where you have to be conscious of what aftermarket switch you pick in some cases. So it's not just like a big universal thing. Everybody is kind of attacking it from their own different direction.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like our solution. So our solution of how we've built the PCB has been copied, but there have been other builds of how to do the PCB in different ways. A lot of the essentials still come down to the same stuff, but some pieces of the logic and which IC parts you use for that is different. And every solution has kind of its pro and con. But then the most important piece is not just about that piece of measurement, it's about what you do afterwards, post-processing, the signal that comes out of the switch.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that process is very important to know deeply, understand deeply, because that's also how you can understand how you can make improvements. And so when doing these keyword measurements side by side, we've actually created this, and we showed this last year in Computex. We used the XStat device to create a keyboard input latency tester, and it's a pretty solid tester. However, once you get started, and you're using the same keyboard and you're testing it over and over and you get different results on different days, right? More variables come into play. Okay, what slight angle is this at? What is the keycap installed? Oh no, there's moving.
Yeah, and I think for people that don't understand, it's so difficult to. I mean, we're creating actuators that are striking the key.
Yeah.
But it has to be at the same speed and the same force every time for the results to be valid. It has to hit in the same area at the same angle, as you say.
Yeah.
Then it becomes very important how quickly it's able to withdraw in order to get an accurate reading on the rapid trigger. And you're working with, at least in my case, off-the-shelf components, trying to MacGyver something together at home that's going to be able to yield accurate results.
Yeah.
I've spent lots of dollars and months and hours and sleepless nights chasing this. So I don't think people understand this is not a simple thing. It's not a simple problem to solve at all.
No, I would say that in general, this approach, so let's say in the beginning with latency testing, you're using the high-speed camera, for example, and you're just looking from end to end,
right?
Which I think is a relatively solid approach. However, the question is like, how small of a detail you're trying to pick up on. And I think the moment we're talking about sub 1 millisecond latency, it's the amount of variables that come into play, like everything matters now. Whereas when you're looking like, let's say sub 10 milliseconds, for example, right? You can be more like 0.2 millisecond difference in variances, right? That's a tolerance range maybe, or like half a millisecond. That's a tolerance range. That's fine,
Sure.
You can ignore those small variances. That's just like tolerance. Yeah, but sub 1 millisecond, no, that's like half of the latency already.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that makes it so difficult to make sure you can do consistent, reliable test across all keyboards. So, we've been doing this internally a lot, and we've been looking at the competitors, what are they doing and what point are they measuring?
Right.
And it's like, well, are we going to pay a lot of attention and focus on trying to compete on this spec piece? Or are we just going to still focus on the thing that we always do? Like, let's find out what is important to the end user. Is the end user going to notice this? Is it important to them that it does that? And also, Americans, you have the empirical system, right?
Right.
Yeah. You don't know what 0.1 millimeter really means.
People have no concept of how small that is. Like what a small deviation that is.
But yet you do a number comparison,
smaller numbers better, period.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just how it works. So if in a sentence, if you had to, if there's somebody out there and they're like, why, if I can go on Taobao and buy a keyboard for $30, why am I buying a Wooting keyboard at this point in the game?
Because the short answer is because 4 months later, you're buying another $30 keyboard. And then a few months later, you're buying another $30 keyboard. And by the end of the road, by the end of the year, you've paid
for that Wooting.
Yeah, basically.
That's pretty good. Yeah. All right. So, obviously I've seen some things at Computex that I haven't revealed yet. I know the 60HE V2 is there, and I can't wait to talk about it because I really thought we were at a point where you couldn't really do much more with the 60% Hall effect board. I was wrong. The 80HE has seen some success. We've seen some knobs getting ready to come out, but it doesn't really sound like there's ever been a moment where you haven't really been conscious of the direction and where you're going to be heading. What does Wooting look like to you right now, 3 years, 5 years from now?
For me, it's still the same. Yeah. The only difference is what is my position within Wooting. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah.
Because my role before is I have many hats that I need to carry and do this thing. But now my role is about how can I drive this? How can I communicate and translate this thing that I have, that Jeroen has, that Erik has, to everyone within Wooting, so they can have the same motivation, the same purpose, and the same fulfillment of doing the work, making the product, and getting satisfaction out of the role. And that goes a bit, beyond this piece of like the revenue and the profit margin. And what we're really, really lucky with is that the founders, the shareholders of this company is still me, Erik, and Jeroen. And we're not into it for the profits. We're not into it for big dividend payout. We're just into it because we really, really just enjoy doing this. And that's the thing we want to keep doing. We want everyone within Wooting to keep doing that. And what is now keeping us very interesting is like, how do we instill this into everyone? Like, that's now our new challenge.
Yeah.
And then if I need to bring it to a product perspective, because for me, this is like, if this is at its core, right? All the other stuff just follows.
Just
right?
works itself out.
Yeah, it works itself out. I don't really need to start worrying about this a lot because somebody's going to pick up on something. We're all going to agree that's great. Let's go that direction. And that will be the next product. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Calder, thank you so much for taking time out. Computex is a blur in a whirlwind, and very thankful that you were able to take some time out and spend some time with me today. It was an absolute pleasure getting to talk to you.
Likewise. Thanks a lot for making the time, and welcome to Taiwan, right?
Thanks. Yeah, first time. Yeah, first time. Won't be the last time for sure.
Great. That's good to hear.
Thanks, man.
So there it is. I think it comes across that I genuinely enjoyed my time talking to Calder. We were actually politely asked to leave the studio because we kept talking about life and goals and philosophy after the cameras cut. The entire Wooting team was an absolute joy to work with, and big shout out to my lovely partner Danielle, who cut all of the video for this project. If not for her, it would have taken 2 more months to get this thing to market. That's it for today. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you all in the next one. Stay up.